The crash, the electromagnetic storm hit without warning, turning Captain Elias Ward's sensors into useless static. His vessel, the Meridian, bucked and twisted through the chaotic energy field like a leaf in a hurricane. Sparks erupted from control panels as the ship's systems failed one by one. "Emergency protocols activated," the computer announced with mechanical calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. "Hull breach detected. Life support failing." Elias gripped the controls, his knuckles white against the metal. 20 years of deep space engineering had taught him to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. The storm seemed almost alive, reaching out with tendrils of pure energy that wrapped around his ship like grasping fingers. Through the viewport, he glimpsed his destination, a small moon that shouldn't have existed according to his star charts. It hung in space like a pearl, its surface shimmering with an opalescent glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the storm surrounding it. The Meridian screamed through the moon's thin atmosphere, trailing fire and debris. Elias fought to keep the nose up, to find anything resembling flat ground. The surface rushed toward him with terrifying speed, crystalline formations jutting up like frozen lightning, vast plains of what looked like polished obsidian stretching to the horizon. Impact. The world went dark. When consciousness returned, Elias found himself lying in tall, silvery grass that chimed softly in the gentle breeze. His ship was gone. Not destroyed, but simply absent, as if it had never existed. He sat up slowly, checking for injuries. Nothing broken, though his head throbbed with a persistent ache. The landscape around him defied explanation. Massive crystal. Formations spiraled toward a sky filled with 3 moons, their surfaces covered in what appeared to be cities of light. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and when he breathed, he tasted copper and starlight. "You're awake," the voice came from. Everywhere and nowhere. Elias spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The grass continued its musical rustling, but he saw no one. "I was beginning to wonder if humans were as fragile as my memories suggested," the voice continued, tinged with what sounded like amusement. "Though I suppose crashing through a temporal barrier would test anyone's constitution." "Who's there?" Elias called out, his voice hoarse. "Show yourself." Laughter rippled through the air like wind chimes. "Oh, you're delightfully direct. Very well, Captain Ward. Let's see if you're worth the entertainment." The air in front of him began to shimmer, and slowly a figure began to materialize from the dancing light itself. The Queen of Light. She appeared like a dream made manifest, emerging from the shimmering air with the grace of flowing water. Queen. Ilyara stood nearly 7 feet tall, her form elegant and alien. Her skin held the luminescence of moonlight on water, shifting between silver and pale blue as she moved. Elaborate patterns traced across her arms and face. Not tattoos, but living light that pulsed gently beneath her translucent skin. Her eyes were the most startling feature, deep violet that seemed to hold the depth of space itself, with tiny points of light that flickered like distant stars. When she smiled, which she did frequently, her teeth were pearl white and slightly too sharp, giving her expression a predatory edge that somehow made her more beautiful rather than frightening. "Welcome, Captain Elias Ward of the Terran Engineering Corps," she said, her voice carrying musical undertones that made the air itself seem to sing. "I am Ilyara, last queen of the Zephyra, keeper of the crystal memories, and your host in this forgotten corner of reality." She moved with fluid grace, her long limbs flowing like liquid silver. Her clothing, if it could be called that, appeared to be woven from light itself, shifting patterns that never quite settled into a fixed design. As she walked closer, the grass beneath her feet began to glow, leaving brief footprints of starlight that faded after a few seconds. "You're staring," she observed, tilting her head with bird-like curiosity. Is it wonder or fear? I find humans so difficult to read. Your emotions are like... She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration, like trying to hear whispers through a thunderstorm. Elias found his voice. What are you? Where am I? Straight to business. Iliara laughed, the sound causing the crystal formations around them to chime in harmony. How refreshingly human. You crash into my domain, destroy the careful barriers I've maintained for centuries, and immediately demand explanations. She began to circle him, her movements hypnotic. You are on Lysithia, the hidden moon, caught between dimensions and time itself. As for what I am... Her smile widened, showing those slightly too sharp teeth. I am the last of my kind, Captain. The final note of a song that once filled the cosmos. The air around her began to shimmer more intensely, and suddenly there were dozens of her, reflections, echoes, shadows dancing in the light. I am memory made flesh, sorrow given form, and the keeper of stories that will die with me. All the duplicates spoke in unison, unless, of course, you prove interesting enough to keep alive. The copies faded, leaving only the original Iliara, who was now standing uncomfortably close. Tell me, Captain Ward, do you believe in second chances? The dance of wit what followed was the strangest conversation of Elias's life. Queen Iliara seemed to take perverse pleasure in confusing him, speaking in riddles wrapped in metaphors, then suddenly switching to startlingly direct observations about human nature. Your species fascinates me, she said, conjuring chairs from crystallized light with a casual gesture. You build machines that can cross the void between stars, yet you still struggle to understand your own hearts. She settled into her chair with liquid grace, while Elias remained standing, suspicious. For instance, she continued, you've been alone in that ship for, what? Months, years, yet you still maintain the illusion that you prefer solitude. I work better alone, Elias replied stiffly. Iliara burst into delighted laughter. Oh, that's precious. You work better alone. She stood and began pacing around him again, her light-woven garments shifting through colors he had no names for. Tell me, Captain, when did you last laugh? And I mean truly laugh, not that polite chuckle humans use to navigate social situations. The question caught him off guard. He tried to remember, but the years of deep space assignments blurred together into a monotonous sequence of repairs, reports, and solitary meals. Seeing his expression, Iliara's smile softened. Ah, there it is. The loneliness you won't admit to. She moved with sudden, jerky motions, a perfect mimicry of human awkwardness that was both endearing and absurd. Is this how you humans show affection? She patted his shoulder with exaggerated care, like someone handling fragile glass. Despite himself, Elias felt his lips twitch. The sight of this ethereal queen attempting clumsy human gestures was ridiculous. Better, she said, noticing the crack in his composure. But we can do better, still. She began walking in an exaggerated human gait, arms swinging stiffly at her sides. I have studied your species for so long, yet I still don't understand why you make everything so angular. Sharp movements, harsh words, straight lines everywhere. She spun gracefully, her natural flowing motion a stark contrast to the robotic walk she'd been performing. We Zephyra believe that beauty lies in curves, in the spaces between notes, in the pauses between words. Like the pause between lightning and thunder, Elias found himself saying. Iliara stopped mid-spin, her eyes widening with genuine surprise. Oh, that's actually quite poetic for a human. You do have hidden depths, Captain Ward, for The first time in years, Elias felt himself truly smile. Not the professional expression he wore during briefings, but something real and unguarded. The moment his smile appeared, Iliara's luminescence flared brighter, her patterns pulsing with warm gold light. She looked genuinely delighted, like a child who had just discovered something wonderful, the question that changed. Everything hours passed, or perhaps days. Time seemed fluid in this place between worlds. Iliara led Elias through her domain, a vast palace carved from living crystal that sang with half-remembered melodies. Each room held wonders, walls that displayed moving scenes of alien worlds, fountains that flowed with liquid starlight, gardens where flowers bloomed in mathematical spirals of impossible beauty. Through it all, Iliara kept up a constant stream of commentary, jokes, and observations that gradually drew Elias out of his shell. She had an uncanny ability to find humor in the smallest things, the way he walked, the questions he asked, his stubborn insistence on understanding the physics of everything around him. "You humans," she said, gesturing to a tree whose leaves were tiny prisms casting rainbow patterns on the ground, "you always want to know how before you accept what. Watch." She plucked a leaf and held it up to the light. Instead of refracting the light into a spectrum, it seemed to gather the rays and weave them into complex patterns that told a story. He could see it somehow, a tale of growth and change and beauty. "How?" he asked automatically. Iliara threw back her head and laughed, the sound causing the entire tree to chime in harmony. "There it is, the most human word in any language." She tossed the leaf into the air, where it transformed into a butterfly of pure light before fading away. "Perhaps how is not always the right question, Captain." They walked on, and Elias found himself genuinely enjoying her company. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, ancient beyond measure yet playful as a child, wise and foolish in equal parts. When she laughed at his awkward attempts to understand her world, he found himself laughing too. It was in the Hall of Memories that everything changed. The vast chamber was filled with crystals of every size and shape, each one glowing with soft, inner light. As they walked among them, Elias could hear whispers, voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, but somehow understood were filled with love, joy, sorrow, and hope. "These are beautiful," he said, reaching toward one particularly large crystal that pulsed with warm amber light. "Don't touch," Iliara said quickly, then softened her tone. "They're fragile. Each one holds the memories of my people, their hopes, their dreams, their final moments." Elias pulled his hand back, but the question was already forming. He'd been wondering about it for hours, watching her glide through these empty halls with such grace and sadness. "Iliara," he said gently, "why are you here alone? In this palace of memories?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Iliara stopped walking, her back to him. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft humming of the memory crystals. When she turned around, her smile was gone. The playful light in her eyes had been replaced by something vast and terrible. Her luminescence dimmed until she was barely more than a shadow among the glowing crystals. "Now you ask the right question," she whispered. The truth. In the light, the transformation was immediate and heartbreaking. The playful queen who had spent hours making him laugh vanished, replaced by a figure of immense sorrow and barely contained rage. The Crystal Palace responded to her emotional shift. The warm lights dimmed to cold blue, and the musical humming of the memory crystals took on a discordant, mournful tone. "You want to know why I'm alone?" Iliara's voice had lost its musical quality, becoming flat and terrible. "I wasn't entertaining you, Captain Ward. I was testing you." She moved away from him, her graceful stride now carrying her toward the largest crystal in the hall, a massive formation that pulsed with deep crimson light. As she approached it, images began to flicker within its depths. 300 years ago, your people came to our world, she said, placing her hand on the crystal's surface. The images became clearer, a beautiful planet with soaring cities of light, beings like Ilyara moving through gardens that defied description. The first human explorers. We welcomed them, shared our knowledge, our culture, our joy. The images shifted, showing humans and Zephyra working together, learning from each other. Elias could see the wonder in both species' faces as they exchanged ideas and discoveries. We were telepathic, you see. We could feel emotions, share them, amplify them. Joy shared is joy multiplied. That was our oldest saying. When we laughed with your people, when we celebrated together, we became more than either species could be alone. But then the images darkened. Human ships, different from the first explorers, arriving in vast numbers, weapons firing, the beautiful cities burning. But fear, Ilyara continued, her voice now thick with barely suppressed fury. Fear. Shared is also fear multiplied. When your military arrived, when they decided we were too dangerous to live, their terror infected some of our people. Panic spread like wildfire through our telepathic network. The crystal showed the final battle, Zephyra turning their own. Abilities against each other in their terror, human weapons tearing through crystal cities, and finally, silence. I survived because I was here, in this place between dimensions, when the connection was severed. I felt every death, Captain, every single one of my people crying out as they died, and I could do nothing. She turned to face him, and Elias saw tears of pure light streaming down her face. So I waited, and I tested. Every human who found their way here was given the same test. Could they make me feel joy again? Could they prove that your species was capable of something other than fear and destruction? The palace walls began to glow red, responding to her inner turmoil. Cracks appeared in the crystal floor as her emotional state became increasingly unstable. They all failed, Captain, every single one, until you. Her voice broke. You made me laugh. You made me feel hope again, and I hate you for it. Elias stepped toward her, his hand outstretched. Ilyara, don't, she cried, and the entire palace shuddered. Don't you understand? I am bound to this place, to these memories. I am the last keeper of my people's legacy. If I choose to forgive, if I choose to love again, the binding breaks. The memories fade. My people die a second death. The red glow intensified, and Elias could feel the palace beginning to collapse around them. But he kept walking toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. Or, he said quietly, maybe their greatest legacy isn't preserved in crystals. Maybe it's the capacity for joy that you just proved still exists. Maybe the best way to honor them is to live. Ilyara stared at him, her luminescence flickering between the warm gold of joy and the cold blue of sorrow. The palace held its breath, waiting for her choice. Now I must choose, she whispered, between keeping the last memory of my people or breaking the cycle to love someone who carries their blood. The walls pulsed red as her internal conflict threatened to tear the very fabric of her sanctuary apart. And in that moment of crisis, Elias realized that sometimes the most human thing you can do is reach for someone, even when the whole world is falling down around you. He took her hand, and for the first time in 3 centuries, Queen Ilyara was no longer alone.